I rented the 6400 as a proxy for the 6600 to see whether I would like to buy the 6600 or the A7 III. And it turns out I'm buying neither. So A6600. Originally, I was looking for a replacement for this A6000, and A6600 came out. The A6400 came out, and I knew, anybody who watches Sony knew, oh, okay, they came out with the A6300, and 7 months later came out with the A6500. Same thing with IBIS. They'll probably do the same thing with the A6400. Sony is a very process-driven, very predictable company if you watch them. You know how they're going to act, and that's exactly what they did. So I was expecting something which was an evolutionary improvement on the A6500 using A6400 technology 6, 7, 8 months after they announced the A6400. And that's what happened. And they called it, amazingly enough, the A6600. So yeah, 61, 64, 6600. The 6600, I was looking at it going, well, let's test out the 6400 since I didn't have my hands on one, so I rented one, using it right now. See what it's like if I'm going to get the 6600. Once I got to use the 6400 and realized that the My Dial solved my problem for ergonomics over this camera in manual mode, I can use My Dial, I can say, boop, it's shutter speed, boop, it's now aperture, perfect. Then I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And a flip up screen, which I'm using right now, I can see myself, I can see that I'm in focus, I can see that the box moves back and forth, tracks my face. I can see my audio levels, to see that thing's recording. It's working. I know how long it's been recording. I have to have my glasses on to see it, but that's because I'm using a longer focal length lens. I mean a wider angle lens. It's working pretty good. I just plug in a lav mic and I can just rock and roll. It's light. So IBIS, I've talked about IBIS before. You know, the IBIS in this thing gives me maybe a stop and a half. I don't care what Sony says about plus or minus 5 stops. I mean, they're smoking something. About a stop and a half. For still photography, IBIS is not that great unless you're shooting below 100th of a second, which is a dumb thing to do if you can avoid it. And for video, the IBIS doesn't work that well. So worth $500 for that? No. Z battery. Z battery is only really useful if you're a videographer. Okay, if you're a videographer, you have no recording limit on this thing, so of course you're going to want no limit imposed by the power source. And if you're a videographer who is on the run and gun, because if you're stationary, you can just plug it into USB power. So again, Z battery is only good for that. Oh, you get a nicer grip. Well, there's other options to improve the grip if you don't like the grip of the 6400. I'm not paying $500 for something bigger. Something smaller, that might be interesting, but not something bigger. So Z battery, IBIS, mic, headphone input. Headphone input, another thing only really for serious videographers. And serious videographers who monitor their audio, which is even a much smaller segment of the population of interested potential customers. Mic input, 6400 has it, using it right now. Headphone output, I'm a one-man show. Are you going to use that? Probably never. Probably never, ever, ever. So what else does 6600 have over 6400 that you would pay $500 for? Eye autofocus in video. Well, I've had this thing I've only been using it to record videos for a day. How does it look? Is it okay as I move around? Again, advanced videographers would probably, if you're using the camera to make a living, they're using the camera to generate serious revenue. First of all, I would probably get 6600 and one of these, right? Both, because they go together really well, using the same battery. 6600 has better autofocus, and I'll talk about the differences there in another video. Better autofocus, better tracking. Yeah, if you're making money and it's your job and it's your livelihood, probably do that. But for me, just some guy who likes to take pictures, mostly of his kids and family and hobbies and vacation, travel. Come on. No, I rented the 6400 as a proxy for the 6600 to see whether I would like to buy the 6600 or the A7III. And it turns out I'm buying neither. What am I buying? Well, I already placed the order and it's coming today. I'm getting a 6400 because it is just that good. And you know what? A lot of people on the internet have been saying that, and I'm like, those guys are dummies. They don't know what they're talking about. And turns out some of them actually do. So thank you, the folks that said that. But you're right. For the money, for my needs, now that I understand how the features like my dial and my menu work, now that I've used it, and I'm really glad I rented both of them because I was really on the fence, and the A6400 was not even on the list. I was going to buy either an A7III and trash all my APS-C stuff, or an A6600. Those are my two choices. I wasn't even thinking about the A6400. The only reason I rented it because I couldn't get my hands on an A6600 to try. I'm glad I did. It was money well spent because now I have the camera that makes the most economic sense. Some of you say, oh, well, you spent money renting the camera, so you really wasted it. You could have got that anyway. Could have. But knowledge is always worth something. If you're not willing to pay to get knowledge, then you'll pay some other way. And so I did this because I think it was the best thing to do. I didn't spend anywhere near the delta, the $500 delta to figure this out. In addition, I got to use a fantastic camera and a fantastic lens. By the way, I rented this camera with a cheapo 24-70 kit lens. And Borrow Lenses called me up the day before they shipped it and said, we don't have that lens available. Will you mind taking this lens for free? I'm like, okay. So I would never rent this thing because this thing is a $2,300 lens and you don't need to have that to test this thing out, test out the ergo. So I rented a cheap kit lens on this thing. So I did not spend that much money renting this, but I got to use it. I got to see how it works. I got to examine the pictures and the picture quality. I did some side-by-side comparison tests. I got to use the 6400. I got to use it in depth because no matter how much you see on YouTube about a camera or a device, it's not the same as having it in your hand. You know, yeah, you could probably buy it on Amazon and try to return it, but I just didn't want to do that in this case because I didn't think it was the right thing to do when you're talking somewhere north of $4,000 worth of computer gear. So it didn't cost me that much to rent it. I lucked out on that, and I'm glad I did because now I'm making a decision which is informed and I know will work for me. So you should think about it if you're on the fence because none of these videos are ever going to really tell you what works best for you. All right, that's it. That's all I have. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And if you like, keep watching. If you don't, go watch something else. See you.